Welcome to the SIDMA tutorial series, funded by EPA Region 5 and the Great Lakes Regional Water Program. In this tutorial, you'll learn how to compare response data between two surveys. In order to better view SIDMA's analytical functions for response data, we need to look at a project with pre- and post surveys and a large number of responses recorded for each survey. The demo project we've been working with for the previous tutorials does not have a sufficient number of responses recorded. So for this tutorial, we'll work with an existing project that does meet this criteria. We want to find the Spring-Fed Creek project in Wisconsin. On the project page, select Wisconsin as a state filter and then open the Spring-Fed Creek project. Note that when you log into SIDMA, you'll likely not be able to compare survey data in this project, since it is not a project you own. This project has a pre- and post survey, each with 350 responses present. Let's assume that the pre-survey was administered prior to an outreach program designed to raise awareness and encourage the adoption of water quality-related practices within the Spring-Fed Creek watershed. Let's also assume that the post-survey was administered after the completion of the outreach effort. Under the Results and Analysis of the post-survey, select Compare Surveys. This opens up a window for selecting surveys to compare. We can select any two surveys from projects that we own. It defaults to the current project we were in, and Survey 1 defaults to the survey from which we selected Compare Surveys. For this example, we want to compare changes between the pre- and post surveys. So we'll leave Survey 1 as the post survey and select the pre-survey as Survey 2. Now we have two options. We can compare the surveys by the response frequencies or by the indicator scores. Let's start with the response frequencies. This may take a little while since SIDMA is essentially calculating response frequencies for two surveys, and then calculating the differences between them. On the results page, we see some blue instructions explaining how to interpret the results. Again, we won't read them here, but please take the time to do so when you compare surveys on your own. The page is essentially the same as the response frequency page for an individual survey, as we illustrated in the previous tutorial. But the values here are the result of subtraction. What SIDMA did was subtract the response frequency values of the pre-Spring-Fed Creek survey from the post-survey. Let's take a look at question 1. The positive value for poor means that 1.1% more respondents deemed the Spring-Fed Creek poor for boating on the post-survey than on the pre-survey. Therefore, it should not be a surprise that 0.8% more respondents deemed the creek good for boating on the pre-survey, as indicated by the negative value. Note that these small changes yielded no difference in the mean, with its value of 0 indicating that the changes canceled each other out. As with the response frequency page for an individual survey, table results can be sorted by column by clicking on the up and down arrows. By sorting the poor column for this category, we can see that there are indications that the confidence in the health and quality of spring-fed fish declined during the time between the pre- and post-surveys. It is possible that the difference can be attributed to sampling. But if the results were gathered from the same population, we may want to explore if there was a recent event, perhaps a newsworthy event, which impacted fish health in the creek. Like the response frequency page for an individual survey, we can also click on a question's text for a graphical display of the difference. Note that the non-numeric questions like number 3 cannot be quantified for a difference calculation. However, differences can be calculated for numeric text questions, such as question 3 in the About You section. We should point out that all of the zeros indicate that there were no differences in the age of the respondents between the post and pre-surveys. This oddity could imply that the pre- and post-survey respondent samples were the same, and that the post-survey was distributed shortly after the pre-survey. In this instance, it's solely because the Spring-Fed Creek response data is dummy data for the purposes of this demo, and we did not vary the answers to this particular question on the post-survey responses. The survey comparison we present here is ideal for measuring changes after a project, like an outreach campaign. However, you can compare any two surveys together that you have access to. There's no requirement that you must compare identical pre- and post-surveys. You simply may be interested in how respondents on one survey differed in comparison to respondents on another. The only limitation here is that the difference will only be calculated on questions that the two surveys have in common. The comparison can include custom questions as well, as long as the custom questions on the surveys are identical. Identical custom questions are unlikely between any two random surveys, but it's possible if the copy survey function was used to create the second survey from the first. The copy function copies over custom questions as well as core SIDMA questions. These two surveys have certain questions in common, and their differences are presented here. Note that these differences are not weighted by the number of responses. If one survey has a significantly larger number of responses than another, the differences calculated between them are still simple subtractions, a difference of percentages, means, standard deviations, and ranges. The means from the survey with more respondents does not have a larger influence on the calculation. So far, we've covered how to compare two surveys in terms of the response frequencies and statistics for individual questions. Now let's take a look at differences in indicator scores. Let's select our pre- and post-Spring-Fed Creek surveys again and click on Compare Indicator Scores. The process in calculating the indicator differences is essentially the same as with the response frequency differences. SIDMA calculates the indicators for Survey 1, then for Survey 2, subtracts the values of Survey 2 from Survey 1, and presents the differences on a page with the same format as the indicator score result page for a single survey. However, this page adds one additional column to each table, indicating whether the difference between two indicators was statistically significant. We'll come back to this in a moment. Recall that several of the awareness indicators require the selection of key questions within several question categories on the survey. If those selections have not been made on both or one of the surveys, SIDMA will not calculate the differences of those indicators between the surveys. In this particular example, overall awareness of water quality improvement practices was slightly higher among post-survey respondents. SIDMA indicates that this difference with pre-survey respondents was statistically significant. We can click on the View Results link to open a window to see how that determination was made. We see a histogram of possible indicator values for each answer, grouped by survey. It's a little hard to see because the symbols for indicator score 2 are so large, but red and blue lines representing the mean values for each survey are listed in the back. The text below details the determination of statistical significance. SIDMA conducted a difference of means t-test from independent samples. The significance is tested against the 5% probability level. The result indicates that it is highly unlikely that the sampled survey respondents came from the same underlying population. This implies that the post-survey respondents were sampled from a population that was more aware of water quality improvement practices, perhaps as a result of the outreach campaign. It's important to point out the assumptions in this calculation, mainly that the samples were independent of one another. At present, SIDMA is not programmed to allow for paired or dependent difference of means tests. In order to calculate a difference of means tests for independent samples, one must determine whether to pool the sample of variances or treat them separately. That discussion is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but SIDMA uses an F-test to make that determination and reports those results here. In this tutorial, we reviewed how to compare two surveys in terms of response frequencies and compare indicator scores between two surveys. In the next and final tutorial, we'll describe how to download and analyze survey data offline. Thanks for watching.